I have with me Omar Shaikh, Director and Co-founder of the Global Ethical Finance Initiative. Welcome, Omar.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So, my first question to you, can you provide us with more insights into your involvement into ethical finance?
Yeah, sure. So I started my journey in ethical finance probably just over 2 decades ago, 25 years ago. As a young kind of chartered accountant, I went through the period where we had the dot-com and the dot-bomb, the boom in the valuations in the late 90s. And then we had the seismic collapse of Arthur Andersen, the world's largest accounting firm at the time. So that really intrigued me as to how does our financial system really work? And what are the kind of challenges we have? Clearly something is not going right. Everything we were taught at university when I did my accountancy undergrad and I was studying at the time to get my CA qualification, clearly something is missing if we can have Andersen collapsing, if we can have Enron, Parmalat, WorldCom, all of these scandals. So that's really where my journey started in ethical and responsible finance, by just asking some questions about systemic questions. Why is it that we operate the way we do? The role of intermediation, who's auditing the auditors, who's looking at externalities of the way we do business.
Very interesting. So, responsible investment involves considering ESG issues when making investment decisions. Since we're referring to ethical, which is part of this whole, system, on what criteria would you base your assessment to determine if an investment aligns with an ESG framework holistically?
Sure. So look, I think fundamentally, the first point you need to start from is it's our traditional understanding of investments, risk-adjusted returns, so the profit component, plus an additionality. Yep. This additionality is it can take into account people, planet, and there are 101 different frameworks out there and definitions and so on and so forth, and you can get lost and confused and indeed put off by that. But what's most important is that you're looking at profit plus an additional factor in that realm. So that's how I see it and how I understand it, having seen the evolution of different frameworks over the last two decades plus. Now, when you talk about ESG, some people traditionally use that as a risk kind of framework, environmental, social, and governance components. Now they confuse the words, and there still is this kind of development of language and taxonomy issues within this sector. So we use the word more broadly sustainability. So for example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that covers 17 different goals. So that's and within the investment management world, the responsible investing is also a terminology that's typically used. But what I would say is it's profit plus an additional purpose. This is not the world of charity. So it's just about purpose or some social cause. This is absolutely the world that we come from, which is the world of investing, but investing in a way which is more holistic and taking all stakeholders into account, not just the singular narrow focus on shareholders and the optimizing the returns from them in a very short-termism mindset.
So you mentioned also the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're mentioning ESG. In the end, maybe we have an alphabet of terminologies, but the context is the same. We want to achieve those goals, and ESG frameworks will help us to, let's say, go through and check what we're doing, the impact, the outcome. So in the end, everything is interrelated. It doesn't really matter on how we call it.
Absolutely.
It's ultimately what we want to create is an equal and just world for everyone. And yes, ethical business, obviously, it's a component that needs to be there if we want to succeed in this. We need it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. And what's fascinating, when you take it the way you've just described it, is why are we having this conversation today? And if you go back over 2 centuries, we're headquartered in Edinburgh, GEFI, the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, and we see it as a place where green and sustainable finance is very much in our nature and the ecosystem there. But that's where Adam Smith, the great Adam Smith, the founder of modern day kind of capitalism, as he's referred to, reconciled between his 2 somewhat opposing views from his 2 great mentors, Hutchison and Hume. A man who was a man of God. In Hutchison's side, he was talking about purpose and innate goodness, and Hume, who was a man looking at self-interest a lot more, and the data, what does it say? So that has always been the case, but something must have happened along the way that we moved to a position where it was just unchecked capitalism, where the markets, had gone so far that we ended up in a global financial crisis driven by the finance and banking world. So that's where we're getting this kind of kickback now and saying, hold on a minute, we need to reflect on what is the purpose of the economy. How can it be inclusive, as the way you're describing? How can it be sustainable in a way that we're managing stewarding the resources of this, the finite resources of this planet in a way that serves everyone? And old concepts are being challenged, things like trickle-down economics. There's a whole generation of young people out there who've walked into a world post-financial crisis where they have not had job security, they have not had opportunities, and they are very much kind of in a mindset of, well, we need to see a better, fairer, more inclusive form of finance.
Yes, it's from unchecked, now have to check.
Absolutely.
So you're also making contributions to nature finance, which is a fascinating topic that has yet to be fully explored, despite the pressing need to protect our ecosystems. In your opinion, do carbon markets represent an opportunity for mobilizing private capital towards nature-based projects?
Yep. So I think there's two different things here. I mean, the carbon issue, the global warming, the GHG issue, is something which the scientists have been going on about for a long time. And initially there was attempts to muddy the science and to say, no, it's not really true, and there's this problem, that problem. But there is now unanimous global consensus that there is climate change. You just need to see what's been happening across Europe in our own backyard in the last 8 weeks and so on. Devastating, catastrophic climate events are there. You cannot deny that reality. Within that world, we have carbon as a single metric, so it's understandable. There's a single measure for that. However, alongside that, the format of our industrialization and the level of impact we're having on the planet and the species from deforestation, etc., is damaging critical species, ecosystems. And even if we address, and this is the scary part, even if we address the global warming challenge and we contain greenhouse gases within the Paris target of 1.5, which we are way off right now, let's not forget that, we are still in danger if the degradation of ecosystems and biodiversity and species loss continues at the rate at which it's going. So that will then impact food, that will impact cotton, that will impact key critical supply chains, and they're so delicately interlinked that we have to address nature and biodiversity as well. Now, that means not just nature and biodiversity as nature-based solutions for the climate crisis, because everyone's talking about climate. We have to think above and beyond that. We have to think about protecting, and there are now rules and laws in Europe beginning to emerge around nature credits and around protection of particular species and zones. But the problem there, which is going to be increasingly challenging for us, is there's no single unit or metric to measure that. Right? So you've already got bankers and financiers saying, oh gosh, sustainability, as you said, the alphabet spaghetti there that's involved. And now you want me to figure out nature and biodiversity. Oh my gosh, this is too much. But we have to. It's absolutely critical that we realize the E in ESG goes beyond climate, also covers nature and biodiversity.
This is interesting because we mentioned carbon markets, which I think it's an instrument which needs to be blended with other instruments. But now you raised the issue of nature credits as well. So sometimes it seems like that we are more inclined to look into something when we put a price on it. And that's why perhaps we need to do that, as we did with carbon, and we convert our actions, because that is what we do in the end, into a CO2 equivalent, and we give it a price. And like that, we are aiming into, transforming operations into a less carbon-intensive industries or sectors or whatever. However, when it comes to protecting what we already have, And it is in a way, I mean, it makes sense to protect what we have, especially some of these, sort of what we have in the oceans, for example, but we have also forests. They are carbon sinks. So we need to protect those, because if we don't, we're releasing even more carbon. So what exactly will we be doing? Are we creating even more problems? Yeah. So we already have the nature-based solutions, which somehow we're not really valuing in the way we should, because these are assets. Yet we invest and we're putting money into new technologies that will be doing the same things, like, sort of storing, capturing and storing. So I think even here, at some point, we need to, scale up the game and determine what we need to do, not reinventing the wheel. And second, when it comes to nature, I think that if it's there, we need to preserve it, because otherwise there will be the systemic effect, as you said. Yeah. So the nature credits, I think, can...
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on there. And we have to remember this whole story of credits. Where does it come from? It comes from a mentality of offsets.
Yes.
Right? And offsets, net zero versus real zero, are two different things. Offsets should not stop us as a global community, as a society, to just reduce our emissions in the first place. That has to be the starting point. We have to reduce. If that means reducing consumption or more responsible consumption, then so be it. We need to think about how certain industries have designed obsolescence in there because it's a better economic model. This product should only last 5 years and not 8 years. So we'll design it to last 5 years so you can buy again, right? Fast fashion, these things. So we genuinely need to look at, first of all, reducing our footprint, as you said. And then the whole challenge we're having in these markets is around authenticity, ultimately. Yeah. Credibility of these. The pricings vary so much between the voluntary carbon markets and the regulated space. And it really is, challenging. And it has to be navigated, for sure. And what's fascinating, again, is we have global frameworks pushing for disclosure. So TCFD, for example, becoming now mandatory disclosure. But why is that? Well, the reality why that is because in our accounting approach, as we produce our financial statements historically, we've never put a number on this. We've never accounted for the negative externalities on our societies, on our communities, on the ecosystem. Even if you take a single materiality approach to it, we've never really accounted for that historically. And if you say accounts are based on the simple principle of a going concern, well, your organization is not really a going concern if you're polluting the river upstream or downstream, because that's going to flip around and impact you. So yes, time horizons may vary, and that's the arguments, but fundamentally our accounting has missed it. Globally, we never managed to agree on a carbon tax. It was just too politically charged. And now we're in this world of offsets. And how much of that offset, of these carbon offsets, how much of that money, exactly to your point, genuinely trickles down to existing sinks in Africa or other places? Very, very little. And the offset is only given if you can demonstrate that this is an incremental difference. So nations who've always protected their forests because that's their culture, that's their philosophy, that's their belief, don't necessarily get any economics for doing that. Whereas other nations are polluting the world, throwing out greenhouse gases day in and day out.
Yes. The thing is, you mentioned the offsets, and this happened, however, because perhaps there's no regulation out there, so we were self-regulated. Yeah. And it transformed into this, there are different things going into different directions at the moment, but in principle, if we use it correctly as an instrument, it should help us. Because as you said, first you have to reduce, first you have to show that this is the limit I can go to, and I'm going to compensate for what I cannot do at the moment, but you have to prove that you really cannot go even further, not just going for the offsets first. So perhaps now we need more guidance, and I think the standards, the CSRD will help with that, because it's not that you can offset, you have to report what you are emitting. If you're buying offsets, that will be separate. So at least there, hopefully, will see this turning into, the right direction, because it's a pity to have tools not being used correctly,
absolutely.
just because we don't know how to self-regulate ourselves.
100%.
Human beings are not compatible with self-regulation, apparently. Whenever we do that, we fail.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And Europe's been a great leader globally in creating the kind of green framework and taxonomies there. And it needs to continue to do that. But it needs to sit, as you say, alongside a cultural and a mindset shift as well.
So last question, Omar. What are the essential pre- and co-requisites for effectively adopting sustainable finance?
Good question. So I think the prerequisites is fundamentally having a genuine, honest conversation about your organization's purpose. What is your responsibility as a financial institution today? Above and beyond the previous narrower thinking, I should say, of simple profit maximization returns to the shareholders, you need to now think stakeholders. You need to think about your fiduciary responsibility within that context. You need to think about your responsibility under the new evolving, changing regulatory regimes, as you said, SFDR, CSRD, etc. So I think that's the prerequisite, is an honest, frank conversation. So for business leaders, for the C-suite, for the board, it's like, okay, we've operated this way for the last 50 years or 100 years. This is where the world is today. How do we need to change our thinking, our behavior, and our philosophy? There. So that's a critical prerequisite. And I think part of that, to be successful in that, is you need to be more holistic in your thinking. You need to challenge your adopted wisdom, but also you need to fundamentally, as a prerequisite, believe that there is an urgency here. Because a lot of targets are 2050 or whatever that is, but trust me,
it's not far away.
It's not so far away, but our target now is actually 2042 or something if we want to hit Paris. We are really at critical tipping points on species loss and so on. So I don't think we have the luxury of playing with the futures of our children and our grandchildren. So you have to realize that it is urgency is critical. The core requisite, I think, is, okay, when you're going on this journey, you need to have two things. Number one, capacity building. You need to be able to learn, to exchange, and to collaborate. And that requires a mindset of openness and investing in your people and investing in your teams. Saying, right, okay, we're committed, we're dedicated to this. So if you're the regulator, you need to build capacity. You cannot regulate something which you do not own. If you're the bank or the financial institution or the asset manager, you need to, again, educate your teams right from the front office, the relationship managers, to how do you position and explain sustainability to your clients? What is their understanding of it? Are they willing to pay a premium? Are they not willing to pay a premium? Are they actually more preferring, green sustainable products, etc.? So there's a whole process of education and capacity building stratified across the different levels within the organization. So I think that's critical. Alongside the core requisite is just maintaining a mindset of collaboration and of this being a journey. The world of sustainability and ESG is not landed at its final destination. There's still a lot of evolution and development. There's a lot of tension points between the E, the S, and the G. And it's very easy to take kind of pot shots at it and say, oh, look at that bit, that doesn't add up. Oh, a tobacco company has got a higher sustainability rating than Tesla, an EV company. How do you do that? That's a contradiction. This whole thing doesn't make sense. If you want to take that mindset, you're not going to get very far. You're not going to be successful in this journey. You'll end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So I think understanding it's a journey and understanding that you have that responsibility is critical as part of that journey.
Thank you, Omar. Very interesting. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.